Everything under enlightenment is rational. Every action and every thought can be explained through analysis, expected through repetition. Duplicate actions and thoughts in the mundanity of the everyday forms a rational, explainable system. Science repeats experiments to confirm a fundamental law. Capitalism studies repeat human behavior to figure out the best way to sell something. Reality, as a system, is thus presented as merely a physical thing, removed of all its truly human elements. Reality is made up of cogs and pistons. Everything is expected and there are no more spontaneous phenomena. Every time we go to work, every time we follow the religious routine of capitalism, every time a prisoner wakes up in their cell, every time another product or animal is processed through a factory, just another commodity. Homogeneous system of duplicate products and workers, modernity is inescapable. It's interesting to explore Adorno and Horkheimer's concept of enlightenment, which crudely summarized is basically the domination and absolutism of capital, which is just another form of human reason. Modern society is so totalitarian that has come to determine reality itself. None can escape, as your fundamental worldview is already manufactured by capitalism. That's basically the gist of it, but you really don't need to understand the book to understand this video. Rationality today is the ultimate branch of utilitarianism, which manifests itself especially in self-sacrifice. Self-sacrifice for the greater good is especially demonic, even when compared to the rest of the Enlightenment. As Zizek says, ideology hides in what we see as non-ideological. This is the same situation. By claiming that self-sacrifice is irrational because it contradicts self-preservation, it hides the cold rationality of self-sacrifice. Disneyland, which is also a common example in explaining Baudrillard, serves to confirm that we don't live in a fantasy. There's Disneyland and then there's real life. But that's obviously false. All we do is live in fantasy. Working hours hides the fact that you're constantly serving capitalism whether in or out of work. And these examples go on and on. But I think the ultimate example is rationality. Self-sacrifice under enlightenment can simply be explained as the natural instinct to preserve the species as a whole instead of the individual. And through this explanation, self-sacrifice is reduced to a mere explainable action, predictable as all else. Mystery has experienced worldwide systematic extermination, and wherever you think you can see remnants of it is merely illusion. E.g., self-sacrifice under enlightenment is the most rational thing you can do. Indeed, mystery itself has been incorporated into the rationalism of enlightenment. The media we watch mostly paint self-sacrifice as something spontaneous and irrational. Maybe side characters will try to hold the hero back, but for the sake of everyone, he or she must risk their life. But what is this everyone? Is not everyone merely enlightened society? The greater good is an idea created by enlightenment for enlightenment. Some heroes might claim that they did it for themselves, but this also hides the cold rationale of their actions. Anti-ideologies are the purest form of ideology. Even the fact that the hero claims to be selfish is just another predictable action and ultimately a reinforcement of the system. But the media I want to talk about today does not have a selfish hero. Parasite the Maxim is an anime that presents us with supposed opposites. Parasites are these things which mimic human beings after taking over their brain and body, but they aren't humans. They don't understand the supposed complexity of human nature. Parasites are very intelligent and logical creatures that care only about themselves. Even if they form an organization, there is no trust between them. It's merely mutual benefit in their eyes. Parasites usually eat the same species of whatever animal they take over. They can take on any form for many purposes, usually blades for fighting or different faces to change identity. Our main character is a rare, though not that special of a case. The parasite that tried to take over his body failed. It was only able to take over his arm. The contradiction is thus this. The logical, self-interested nature of the parasite is in contradiction with the supposed morality of the human coexisting with said parasite. Human emotion versus pure rationality. But this hides the true horror of humanity. The show's so-called exploration of human nature is in reality the exploration of human nature under enlightenment and capitalism. The parasite, however, notices this as they view things from an objective perspective. They see through human society and attempt to subvert it with a new perspective, pure logic. But this subversion is actually not a subversion at all. The parasite is just another form of irrationality. Again, it is doing what enlightenment did before, oppression on its own terms. Though the parasite is much more honest than enlightenment, it openly admits that it's self-interested. Thus, we are presented with an extremely pessimistic situation. There is no escaping rationality. Both the parasite and the human are rational beings. They both self-interested and both hate all forms of mystery, all forms of true humanity. Contemporary human nature is a parasite to the concept of humanity. Its claim to be humanity devalues the concept of humanity, devours it from the inside out. The physical living organism called parasite that the show presents us with is in the sense not a parasite at all, but an ally to contemporary human nature, the unfiltered truth, the reinforcement of what being human is today.
Have you ever heard the term Judeo-Christian values? I suspect you have.
Voicing this at 2 a.m. have to be quiet. Only time where there's no background noise. You don't care. Here's the fucking video. Following the same logic, when the main character slowly becomes more cold and logical as the show progresses, he is actually getting closer to human essence, not further away. But that's not necessarily to say he is closer to reality, because again, reality is illusion. So by dismantling the symbolic order, removing the face of civility, the illusion of humanity, it becomes an obscenity. The subject is no longer placed in a scene. The development of the idea of you is disrupted. And here I will stop talking about the show for a while. In Lacanian psychoanalysis, you have a desire to be more yourself. But the idea of you is a void and always has been. This idea of you is formed in the mirror stage, when you recognize your reflection as you, and when you recognize what the parent refers to as you. The parent, of course, represents the big other, this higher order, the symbolic order. The parent is the embodiment of the rules of society that prohibit you from enjoyment, and this loss of enjoyment because of the prohibitive rules forms your sense of self. Your sense of self is a lack. You always feel incomplete because you are makeup of the symbolic. Your sense of self must necessarily depend on the gaze of others. These academics write in their article From the Imaginary to Theory of the Gaze in Lacan, quote, the ego searches for itself an imagined identification. In the mere stage prior to the formation of the discourse of the demand, 1. The imaginary structures the identification of the self based on an interaction between the self and the external other. It is the gaze of the other that forms the imagined idea of you. Quote, the gaze is elusive because the subject is dependent on it in the field of desire. Like the voice, it is about the desire on which the subject is supported. It is one of the objects on which the phantom depends. The subject, the ideal ego, the you, and so on, depends on the desire of the other, the gaze of the other. This is your cause of desire, object petit a. You're constantly desiring a sense of self. You're constantly desiring the affirming gaze of society. But this desire will never be fulfilled because it is the cause of desire, object petit a, not actually a desire. You wanting to be more yourself causes you to desire things. The idea of you is void, it is all inside of your head, so you will never fulfill this desire. So that's the very basics of Lacan, like the very, very basics. And what's particularly interesting here is, of course, the big other, the symbolic society, what everyone, including Zizek, likes to focus on. In an annotation of Lacan's The Split Between the Eye and the Gaze, Phil Lee writes, quote, the gaze denies the subject its full subjectivity. The subject is reduced to being the object of desire, and in identifying with this object becomes alienated from itself. And this turning of the subject into an object, to follow in the Marx-Freud tradition of philosophy, specifically Foucault's Discipline and Punish, is this also not the power of the symbolic, the institution, the instrumentalization of human reason? Or in short, the gaze of the other can also be the gaze of capitalism. The institutions of power which makes you feel like you're constantly being watched, i.e., worker self-surveillance. The desire to serve capitalism is the turning of humans into objects. That is the power of capitalism inside of your head. The imagined other which forms your sense of self. And here I want to make another crucial analysis. Rather than the idea of you being made up of imagined desire and or institutions of power, the real reality that we experience on a daily basis, however, is that the you exists. The undisputed truth in the show to the other characters is that something has occurred within the main character, and only within outside factors cannot exist. To them, the untouchable soul has been touched. Their gaze of him, and in turn his gaze of them, has been altered. The other characters predictably react with horror at this change, sadness at the loss of the illusion of the human. This unfamiliarity with cold logic is a lack, which is desire. Anti-Oedipus disagrees that desire is a lack, but anyway. Therefore, the other characters merely desire the main character as an object of desire. They pursue the understanding of him only because he makes them who they are. He is an imaginary other representing the symbolic order inside of their heads, a source of comfort and familiarity. And knowing this, I want to make yet another analysis. Is not this desire for the familiar also the desire for domination? The repetition of the main character's behavior allowed other characters to predict his future actions. They quote-unquote know him. Is this not the desire for domination as dictated by the Enlightenment? Everything must be subjugated, understood in all its complexity. This is science, this is writing, this is capitalism, this is the nation state, and this is the nature of forming an idea of a person. The gaze of capitalism forming your desires is domination, and people are reproducing that domination by understanding other people in terms of ideas created by society, just like how capitalism, quote unquote, understands nature and explains it in all its complexity, subjugating nature under its control. In this sense, what other characters lack then is the contemporary mode of control, the world of enlightenment, where there are no unknowns, no irrationality, and everyone behaves in a quote-unquote human way, ideas like compassion and such, where there shall be no obscenities, there shall be no unexpected phenomena. Those who do not behave in a human way are parasites to humanity, and such parasites shall be exterminated in the name of humanity. So I must say again, the real reality is that the gaze does not exist. The symbolic order and institutions of power do not exist. What is real is only their effects, only the results, not the functions, not the systems. What is real is the idea of a human on the surface, not everything that makes up the idea, that manufactures it, but only the surface. It's not that you can magically reveal the real reality beneath our conceptions of a human or any other truth about capitalism, exploitation, if you just yell it out loud. It's that real reality is not real at all. It is a Lacanian real in a way, I guess you can describe it as a traumatic truth that is precisely blocked and exiled by reality, which is made up of the symbolic and the imaginary. It is not a truth. The idea of humanity is manufactured for the sake of the status quo, for the sake of domination, for the sake of the ego which pursues endless desire. Whatever the culture considers to be human at the time, whatever makes you more you, is truth. It is as indisputable as the word of God. The gaze of the big other, the symbolic, is undisputed truth, reinforced by the homogeneous media of the culture industry. The truth to the author of this anime, as dictated by the unquestionable modernity, is that the main character has changed, has become more inhuman, less predictable, more cold, less familiar. The inhumanity of capitalism is ignored while people continue to accept its effects, because this is what's human today, and the inhuman producing the human is perfectly sensible, because people are truly so much lesser than systems. Systems are so totalitarian that truth is illusion and illusion is truth. Marx's superstructure is precisely one of the earlier conceptions of this type of system. The proletariat is subjugated under an economic base, which produces a cultural superstructure. Politics, police, law, culture and religion, education, ideology, etc. reinforces the capitalist economic system, which then in turn produces the former. The superstructure reinforces the economic base, and the base produces the superstructure. Colonialism, for example, is an economic base. Slavery, which produces the idea that blacks are not human, as well as a variety of other cultural phenomena. The ramifications of this theory of superstructure was unpronounced to Marx. Today, this theory is more relevant than ever. Humanity is determined by morality, which is itself determined by capital. Let's take the Iraq War, an easy and understandable example. The Bush administration and the media abstracts Iraq into the Western conception of it. They also create the false reality that Iraq has WMDs. This abstraction then gets further abstracted into, for example, a Call of Duty game, which paints the Iraq War in a pro-US military light. In Jacob Geller's video, he explains Call of Duty's stance on torture, which is this: it is good when it helps the good guys win. The good guys, of course, being terrorists killing patriots. And torture is also good when it is strictly used to punish the bad guys, because the bad guys don't deserve to be treated as human. They, not capitalism, causes all the problems in the world. And, punishing them is like punishing evil itself, Obviously, abstracting and creating reality, manufacturing consent and morality, inventing humanity and inhumanity, that is the power of neoliberalism.
Because people have got to know whether or not their president's a crook. Well, I'm not a crook. I've earned everything I've done. President.
And sing it loud. And find someone who'll stick around.
In short, capitalism dictates human nature. It dictates morality and human rights. It dictates desire and the cause of desire. It dictates gender and mental disorder. Capitalism is embedded in almost everyone. Almost everyone except its ridiculous premises and its social constructs. Human rights are good and absolute, even though they are granted to you by the state, and therefore is a massive power imbalance. Humans are naturally selfish, donate to charity or consume a product. Mental disorder and sex and gender exist just as race does, civility and manners, or the opposite depending on your audience. Humans drink tea in the European building and non-humans hunt with spears. And it doesn't matter whether or not you know what capitalism is trying to do. The reality is trying to construct. Because ultimately, there is no alternative. We are different from absolute logic. We have this soul. We are incomprehensibly human, even though we describe humanity only in terms of concepts provided by our capitalist culture and never actually embrace true diversity, only the diversity that capitalism allows, i.e. the illusion of choice by limiting our choices, freedom as long as it's not an alternative to capitalism.
Gates has spent the last decade putting billions into eradicating disease, building better infrastructure, and generally trying to improve our world. He's by no means perfect, but it would be hard to claim that he isn't trying. Should he not be held up as an example of what can be done within the system, rather than simply remembered as the giant monopolist he was?
Spit 'em out.
Cold rationality, parasites, has been deemed inhuman by a cold and rational society which basically functions as a factory, and the idea of a human does exist, according to the system that cares not for people, individuals, but only profit. The parasite serves as something inhuman for the humans to compare themselves to, thus preventing them from realizing that they themselves are already inhuman. Or rather, their idea of humanity is manufactured. Humans are homogeneous in their structures and institutions, cultures and social norms, technology and knowledge. And ultimately, all is homogeneous under currency, which today has become the totality of capital. Humans do self-sacrifice to reinforce the illusion of the symbolic order. Money, institutions, culture, religion, and such. Death itself, the ultimate negation, has thus seemingly already been negated, already non-subversive. The deaths of workers in sweatshops, the suicide of artists, the enhanced famines and wars by capitalism of the third world, all a calculated form of human sacrifice for the god of enlightenment. With the rise of anti-immigration sentiment, especially in Europe, and our lack of interest in opposing imperialism being used to our iPhones, relying on slave labor while trying to survive ourselves, the power of the state proven to be absolute with the Iraq War and Israel, demonstrating that the West can do whatever it wants and get away with it. It's hard not to see fascism coming as the crisis of climate change escalates. Billions will die and the state of emergency will be permanent. If 9/11 was an emergency that justified the war, how much will climate change's emergency justify? Today, people have forgotten that history still moves and the past still exists, allowing for the possibility of a future.